Welcome to my podcast, Shaping Your Journey. My name is Aldo Mazza, percussionist, drummer, and artistic director of Cosa Music, inviting you to join in conversations with friends, artists, professionals, and experts in the music world, in our music world. And if you enjoy this, don't forget to subscribe. Today, I have a real pleasure of having Joe Franco, an old friend, well, not old friend, a friend who I've known for a very long time, who's done some great things. And of course, we're going to talk about that. Joe, thank you so much for being and joining me as my guest on Shaping Your Journey.
Well, it's great to be here. And it's so great to see you. I haven't seen you in many PAS shows ago.
Yeah, it's amazing how we remember people by where we saw them last, if they got a hit record or did something really wrong. but familiar face. The Modern Drummer festivals back in the day. Remember the PAS shows? Yeah, amazing. That about connecting. In the past few years, it was weird because we haven't seen as much. We haven't gone to those places and taken those paths or been on the road so much for good reason, but now it's great to connect. And with technology, of course, just makes things so much easier. Tell me something, before we get into the whole trajectory of Shaping Your Journey, tell us, or tell me and us, where did it all start? Like, what was that initial spark? It's always interesting to know how and where did it start for you?
Well, I grew up in a household with a drummer. My uncle. We had this Italian household with my grandparents on one floor. We were on another floor. I had an uncle on another floor. Anyway, when my uncle got married, he had a drum set, and they just stayed down the basement. They were just collecting dust. And the Beatles came on Ed Sullivan one night, and overnight I went from Mickey Mantle to Ringo Starr, because music seemed a lot cooler than baseball. And it was really overnight, I mean, I was intrigued. But my uncle used to, he'd rehearse at the house, and I'd see him with his band, a club date band. He had a couple of horns, and don't even remember the instrumentation. But, it didn't really interest me too much. But then the Beatles came out. I knew I had a drum kit in the basement, and that it was a no-brainer,
Nice. It's funny you said that, because I had exactly the same thing. The next morning, we were all musicians in the schoolyard, right? No, I didn't have an instrument, though. We were playing on brooms, we were playing on things, but we were all musicians instantly. That was amazing. That was really amazing. For those who didn't get that experience, and I mean, people of our age and generation certainly did, and we can share that story. But the people who didn't, they really missed something, because that was like humongous. That was like an atom bomb.
Well, that was only stage one of that whole generation that we both come from. Then there was the second British invasion, as I call it, with, the Who, the Cream, Hendrix Experience, which really broke in England. That was kind of like, oh my God, like, what is going on here, And that whole generation was mid-high school for me. Mid-high school was 67. 67, hello? Hendrix, Cream, Sgt. Pepper, West Coast had the Dead, the Airplane, East Coast, my neighborhood had the Young Rascals, the Vagrants, the Vanilla Fudge. These were guys you saw in music stores, Rascals played my high school, I saw Carmine's very first drum clinic, that kind of stuff. So they were local heroes, I mean, like, the Beatles being, in the UK, and that whole British invasion that I love, and the West Coast invasion, and all the surf music and all the ventures and all that stuff. But my home had, the Rascals, the Fudge, and the Vagrants. They were, that 67, 68. That's what was happening.
Nice.
And that's what grew me up. That was my foundation. seeing that music live, not on YouTube.
Yeah, yeah. It's really crazy because there was a period in high school, same thing for you, but I mean, nobody was really local for me. I grew up in I was born in Italy, in Calabria, and I know I just learned your Calabrese too. Nice. But I was first generation. I was 9 years old when we came. So I grew up in a little town, Ottawa, but at a certain point after the Beatles thing, I got really interested and I got totally hooked. I never looked back. But in high school, I went to every single concert that came to the city. So I saw the Cream, I saw the Who, I saw the Chicago, like everybody, Frank Zappa, Weather Report's first version. So I saw every single person, and now it's looking back. I said that was only like 3 years, but every single artist who came out had nothing to do with the last. You would see ELO or you would see Hendrix, and one had nothing to do with the other, or Chicago for that matter. Like all those guys, it was just so different every week, right?
Yeah, well, sometimes in New York, Bill Graham used to put completely different acts on the same bill. So sometimes
Wow.
in the same night, you can see three different vibes, completely different. They'll have a rock band and Buddy Rich's orchestra and a blues artist on the same bill. So it was crazy that the
Wow.
amount of music to absorb.
Yeah, and that was for you kind of like what, because you grew up. For me, you were always that double bass drum. What do you call it? Heavy metal band guy for me. When I would see you, and so that whole lineage of that kind of drumming was probably really New York, right? That vibe.
Well, yeah, I think.
I'm talking about like the good Rats and Twisted Sister that you
Yeah.
were.
Yeah, but for me, it emanated from the Brit bands. I mean, the first double bass guy for me, it wasn't Louis Bellson. It was Ginger Baker,
Ginger Baker,
because I was
yeah.
a rock guy.
Of course.
And when I was in high school, Cream and Hendrix were religion. I mean, that was all we talked about. And in fact, when Cream broke up, Jack Bruce went on to play with this guy, Tony Williams. I don't know who Tony Williams was. I didn't grow up with Miles. I got into it after the fact. But
Yeah.
I followed Jack into Tony Williams' lifetime. And when I bought Turn It Over and put that on.
That's the black album, right? The black cover? I have a story with that one. Go ahead.
Well, first song, side 2. I remember I literally turned it over, is the name of the album, right? I forgot the name of the song, but it had the 6/8 groove that I said, oh my God, I never thought of playing a 6/8 groove. But back then I played rock beats, shuffle beats, but this is like so African and so polyrhythmic. And to this day, when I solo, I always find a 6/8 groove somewhere. I mean, became my favorite thing, but that led down the path, Tony, and then, Mahavishnu and the whole thing, So in the 70s, when I was playing in rock bands, I mean, I listened to rock bands and all, but as a drummer, I was listening to what was going on in that fusion vein. And, a lot of Billy, a lot of Alphonse Mouzon, Lenny White, that was where I was getting drummer smarts. Fortunately, I played in a band that allowed me to fool around with arrangements, and I was able to bring some of that to the party with Good Rats. One of my guitar players, Mickey, he loved Mahavishnu and loved a lot of jazz guitarists. So we were able to put a lot of that into our band, even though the focus of the band was a singer-songwriter. He would bring in a song, but allowed us to arrange it and bring our musical love into the picture. And so it was a fun band for me to grow up in, But anyway, what was the question?
No. There's no questions or only answers, Joe. The
Right.
I'm just. But did you have a music program in this high school that you were going to? Just curious.
No, I never did. I never played in my high school's drum corps because you had to play in these neighborhoods in Brooklyn that you didn't really want to hang out in on a Saturday afternoon. Um, I, I think, fortunately, um, grew up in the time where if Johnny down the block played guitar and Jimmy around the corner played bass, you got together at the drummer's house and you put a band together. I always had a band. So I would live for the weekends where we would rehearse all day and then go to the Fillmore and see our heroes at night.
Ah,
That was how I grew up. That was my high school formative years when I was 15, 16, 17. Those were the years where Fillmore East was blossoming.
wow.
New York City was alive with all this great music, and I had a band, and so we'd go see Jethro Tull and come back and play a Jethro Tull song, and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's so
yeah,
cool. I mean, I kind of did the same, but I can only imagine going down to see somebody like the Rascals, because I mean the Rascals for after the Beatles for me was the Rascals, because I always
same.
emulated Dino Danelli. He was my second favorite, and I even set up like him after it was Ringo, and then Dino Danelli was more. Like he had a different style, and people would say, "Hey, you're looking like Dino Danelli," and for me that was a compliment. They were amazing that band. I remember the
Oh,
songs.
the Rascals! You could not take your eye off of Dino. He was
Yeah,
so dynamic, and
yes,
you could just watch Dino the whole show. He was just had everything.
yeah,
He had groove, he had chops, he had the look, he had the twirls.
yes,
He had everything.
yeah.
You know.
Him and Carmine Appice. Remember the Vanilla Fudge? I mean, I'm sure you had the same kind of experience where these guys were doing something that was different each time you heard a band. It was different from the next. So that inspired you to go back and work some more and do some more and think differently, more outside the box, right? Was that
That
your
was the
experience?
exact progression. Uh, the Beatles, it was Ringo, and then when you saw Dino, it was like he became your new hero, and he was also Carmine's hero. Carmine made it heavier, but that progression of Ringo, Dino, Carmine, and then from there Bonham,
Yes, yes.
was my progression as far as rock drumming. Yeah.
And then when like bands like the Good Rats, was that like just an accident, guys in the neighborhood, or did you do audition?
No, it's a very crazy story how that came about. I was actually, I'll try to make it brief because it's a very long story, but I was taking drum lessons from someone who was putting a band together, and he hooked up with these two brothers, Pepe and Mickey Marcello. And he says, "Wow." He says, I just hooked up with these two brothers, but we need a guitar player and bass player. And I had just left a band with a great guitar player and bass player. So I introduced the brothers and my drum teacher to this bass player and guitar player that I played with for years. A month later, I get a call from my bass player, Lenny Kutke, who I later played with in Good Rats. Um, and he said, "Joe, I love this band. Thank you. But we need you in this band. And that's how I became the drummer in Good Rats. I replaced my drum teacher, who was drummer. Crazy, right? But that's what happened with me. And the reason I left the band I was in, which had a band, a record on Polydor, and it was a kind of cool band, great players, but I had no recording experience. And the Good Rats had a production deal at a pretty famous studio in Long Island called Ultrasonic. It's um, it's where Vanilla Fudge recorded. It's where Iron Butterfly made in Legata de Vida. I think even Beck Bogan and Appice did some work there. And every time our singer Pepe wrote a new song, we can go into the studio and record it. So that was like a really big thing for me because I just wanted to be a drummer. And the fact that I can actually now get some recording experience is what sold me on Good Rats. And of course, it was a great experience because after a year of playing bars where we would play half commercial songs and half original songs, we landed the deal with Warner Brothers. And that coincided with my last year of college in 72, 73. And so I literally played with the Good Rats while I was going through my last year of school, and then landed the deal with Warner Brothers and just took off and became a full-time drummer, which was just perfect timing, you know.
Nice, nice.
And I played with this band for 10 years, from 72 to 82. And I got to say, we probably averaged 5 nights a week,
Wow.
sometimes 7, sometimes 4, but never less than 4. Played constantly. That doesn't happen anymore. I mean, I could take off for a couple of years and get behind the kit and make it happen because it's just like it's like breathing when you play that often. It's really something that I don't think happens anymore.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
I don't,
it's the same as that idea of the 10,000 hours, basically, right? If you do
yeah,
it enough, I mean, like the
yeah,
Beatles, that by the time they made it internationally where we heard them, they had done probably twice that already by that time, right? And that's what made them such
that's what,
glue. And so,
totally.
yeah, and then they could read each other's mind.
One thing I always told my students is that there's kind of 3 levels of learning. One level being, okay, I'm playing this properly. It feels like shit, but I mean, like, I'm playing the right stuff, right? And then you get to the second level where this is grooving, this is happening, it's fluid. Oh, I really got this down. But how many times you think you have it down and you get on the bandstand and it kind of falls apart, That's the third level. When you can apply that concept musically, then it's part of your vocabulary,
Yeah.
And when you're in a situation where you're playing 5 nights a week, you have all this opportunity to apply these things you're working on, hopefully in a musical way,
Right.
and yeah, there's no replacing that, Um,
Yeah, it's like
it,
basically a conversation you can have because you've studied that material way in the back, so you can bring it to the table in the conversation at a moment's notice with thinking on your feet kind of deal. You don't have to think about it. It's like it just comes out because it's part of you now. That's I guess when they coined the 10,000 hours, I mean that's part of it. That's what that means,
yeah.
right? That's fantastic. And then, like from there, how did the Twisted Sister come in, playing with that band?
Well, Twisted Sister were always good friends of mine. Um, in fact, they would open up for the Good Rats, in the early days when they were a cover band. And then and we always liked them. They were funny. We always hit it off, and I always liked all their drummers. They had a lot of drummers. Um, in fact, they took me into the studio the first time they went into the studio. They went to Electric Ladyland um, with Eddie Kramer, and
Wow.
they wanted me to go in because they knew I was good buddies with their drummer, and I can kind of coach them along and just kind of like help out any way I can. So we're always tight. AJ left for the band and 86, I guess. And I actually was coming out of a drum center. I was teaching a couple of days a week, and they were rehearsing across the street, doing demos for their next record. And I just kind of walked in and I said, "What are you guys doing? Good to see you." "Oh, we're doing demos." "Oh, let me see what you're doing." Now, long story short, I had just about that time got into programming. And I'll tell you that story because that's a really interesting story
Yes,
as well.
yes.
And I said, I'm pressing the buttons on the drum machine, and it wasn't really rock, and I'm wondering who programmed this stuff. I said, they go, you know how to do this stuff? I said, sure. Long story short, I wound up programming all their demos and this and that. And we got to talking, and like Joe, you want the gig, we're not going to audition anyone. I mean, it's your gig. So it was easy for me because we were kind of family, even though we never really I never played in the band. We were family. That whole circuit back then of the tri-state bar bands. So yeah, that's how that happened. And the way that evolved is before we got ready to do the Twisted album, D was producing this other album, and he asked me to play drums on it. Maybe he was testing me out. I don't know, but
Right.
we hit it off really well there. And then he confided in me one day and said, I'm doing this last Twisted record, but I want to do a new band, and I'd like you to play drums in it when it comes about. And that band evolved into Widowmaker, which is the band I did with D after Twisted Sister. And D and I are still best of friends. We talk all the time and text, and he's a good guy. Yeah, so that's how the whole Twisted D Snyder thing evolved in my career.
So the programming you were talking about.
Yeah, programming is funny thing about that, because we all know by the mid '80s, Lindrum pretty much.
I still have
dominating.
I have the Lindrum.
The original. Wow.
The original. And you remember back in the day, because I used to do a lot of studio sessions. I did a lot of classical, everything, and I would do a lot of programming and studio sessions. At the time, you needed to have the latest because they would ask you. Say, do you have the Lindrum? Do you have the DMX? So you used to have to buy it, and it continued. So you got on a roll, and they cost at the time, I remember, $3,500. It was the magic number, right? And so you had it, and then normally what I would do, I would buy it, and then when I saw a new one coming up, I would tell my students or friends, anybody want to buy this one? Because I'm going to get the next one. So they would get a great deal, and I would just keep on going. Somehow the Lindrum stayed, and I don't know if I forgot about it or it just slipped through and I forgot. I still have it.
It's a museum piece now. Hold on to it. I've got my old Simmons 5 brain still. Just the brain. It's like the mini Moog of drums,
Yeah. No, I remember. The last one I had was the 7. So how did you?
I had the 7. I had the 7. Basically, what happened with me? Okay, Lindrum. Okay, I wasn't buying it. Give me the sticks. It wasn't until I bought the 7. I bought the Simmons 7 because I can hit those with sticks, and you can. I heard you can actually burn your own sounds onto an EEPROM, which you could at that time. Yeah. So that was a big step. A big step for me was personalizing the instrument, and so that's when I dove into the Simmons. Then the thing that really got me into electronics was the EMU SP12. Yeah. Why? Because you can put all your own drum sounds in this sampling drum machine. Okay, so now I could be me, but yet program my sounds. Lindrum, everyone sounded the same, other than Prince, who you detuned that side stick so much it was unrecognizable. but it was all the same. It wasn't appealing to me, But the SP12, I kind of that was a cool thing. But it wasn't until I was basically kicked off my own project on a record I did with a gal named Fiona. Bo Hill was producing. I did 6 songs, and there were 4 to go. And he goes, I'm going to bring in a programmer for those 4 songs. So this happened at the same time as the SP12 was coming about. I'm reading about the SP12. I got kicked off this project. I knew there was a buddy of mine in town with an SP12, my friend David Beal. I went over to his place. He showed me the ins and outs of the SP12. I said, wait a minute. I could take all my Simmons 7 sounds, put them in my SP12, buy an octapad to trigger them. So I sold my SD7, bought an SP12 and an octapad, and that became my rig with a Commodore disk drive with
Oh
floppy
boy.
disk, the ones that really were floppy.
I still have one of those too.
So that was the beginning. And then Donnie Blank wrote a software program where you could take a Mac, what did they call them? What the first Apple, Macintosh.
Yeah, Macintosh.
Mac 2, whatever it was. And you had the Macintosh, and you can save on the hard floppies. You could save your drum sounds and put your whole sample library in the Mac. And I remember buying a 20 gigabyte hard drive, which was the size, 20 megabyte. It was the size of a lunchbox.
Yeah.
It cost like $800, 20 meg. But you could put all your drums in there, Anyway, so that's the evolution. But what it led to was a great thing, because if I didn't go there, I would have lost a big part of my journey. And this is what we're talking about here, okay? What happened with me then is I got into the SB12. I got into being asked to play on a lot of sessions, a lot of jingles. Advertising was big. Most of the prominent New York session guys, that's what they did all day. They played on jingle, the jingle, the jingle. It was lucrative. It was fun. You played with other cats. But that was turning to programming as well. So at one point, I did all the beer commercials and the truck commercials with my kit. And then all the other stuff I programmed, and it became, pretty fluent. And I graduated to the MPC 60 when Roger Lynn got involved with Akai, and he took the Lindrum to a programming standard, where you can make your samples. And so I combined that with an Akai sampler, and it just snowballed into catching the ear of a producer who was involved with Twisted Sisters demos back then. Talk about tying the whole thing together. His name is Rick Wake. And he heard what I was doing, and he hired me to do Taylor Dane's second record. And that led to Celine Dion's record and Diana Ross and Hall & Oates. And I did so many records as a programmer because I caught the ear of this producer, Rick Wake. So everything he did, I was in. So, I went for everything. Donny Osmond, Barry Manilow, people that would never hire Joe Franco,
sure.
Not that guy. We're doing a pop record,
Yeah.
So basically, I would program the pop stuff, and I'd rock out on the proggy and the rock stuff, So this is late '80s. I was busy with these two different worlds. The way things evolved for me past that was when you're programming and you're in the studio doing records, all of a sudden you're in the control room. You're not on the other side of the glass with cans on, turning around after every take, and they're talking and you don't know what they're talking about. You're in the control room. And then it became, what does that button do? What does that do? I started getting involved with gear, then, as in the mid '80s, the whole MIDI thing blew up. And then as a drummer, I was like, wait a minute. I can punch in a little bass line, call on a guitar player. I can write music, because I couldn't really fluently play. I could play a little keyboard enough to punch out a bass line and play some chords, some pads, but, not enough to really present a demo to somebody, But now you could as a drummer, and that opened up a lot of doors for me. And one of the doors that opened up is building up this big studio in my loft in Manhattan. And it became a place where I can actually do a lot of production. So the way this evolved into my current day status, where I have I'm not sure if you're familiar, I have a facility called Beatstreet, and I've had it for almost
a while,
30
right?
years, since '95.
Wow.
Yeah.
Nice.
What happened in '95 is I got married and we started making babies. So all my big studio in my loft became a baby's room. And I walked 3 blocks down the Broadway, 22nd and 3rd I lived on. I walked to 22nd and Broadway, found a nice space, and started Beatstreet. And this was in 1995,
Wow.
28 years ago. Now, why, what made you want to put a big studio together? Well, because I had a drum studio I was renting. Me and Jonathan Mover, we went partners on a room a block away on 22nd Street. I knew every crack in the sidewalk on 22nd Street. I
Right.
walked I walked I walked those 3 or 4 blocks for 30 years. Anyway, so I ended that studio. Me and Jonathan, we parted ways on the studio
So you
collaboration,
weren't
and I
you were you on in the studio with him? Because I was in his
just for
studio in
drums. Yeah.
Manhattan. Oh, so that was a different one. The
It
one
was
I
just a
visited.
drum studio. Me and Jonathan, we shared a room.
Ah,
We
okay.
each taught one day a week from there, had paid for the room, and we had a place to play. That's the way you do it in Manhattan. You're not going to play drums in your apartment.
No.
So, I mean, I had a D drum kit in my apartment. I had my recording studio. So I took all that stuff, took my acoustic drums, and I created a situation where I could play on people's records, from the comfort of home, you know. Um, and what that led to is my second career, which is what I still do, and that is Beatstreet. And what happened is I was doing a lot of programming things for Sesame Street at the time, and they told me they had a new show coming out. It was called Between the Lions. This was in the late '90s, okay? And they said, we would love for you to play drums. We want a live band. And I got my foot in the door through programming because Sesame Street had their own drummer, but when they were off season and they did these direct to VHS tapes like Big Bird Gets Lost or I would program for those. And so got my foot in the door with Sesame Street people who are great people. They're like old hippies like myself. And like so that led to this Between the Lions thing, and I already had Beatstreet together, and I said, if you want me to play drums in this show, you might want to come and check my studio out. I'm like mic'd up, ready to rock. They came over to see my studio, and they said, we can do the whole show here. And that led to my second
Nice.
career. And I tell
Nice.
this story all the time because being a drummer led to everything in my life, okay? It led to, I became a drummer. That led to programming. That led to electronics, which led to open up a studio, which led to playing drums for a television show. That led to doing the whole show because Between the Lions, they had a post facility, but in a couple of years that was too expensive. And they asked if I could mix the show. I said, of course. And we got into doing Foley, we got into doing sound design, but it all came from being a drummer. It is how my whole journey evolved. I met my wife as a drummer. She hired
Yay.
me.
The best part. The best part. Yeah.
She hired me. She was producing a session for a jingle. She was a music producer for a music house, and she needed a drummer. Hired me, and that's how we met. And so again, like I said, the story continues. It all comes from being a drummer.
Nice.
So
Nice. But
play the drums, and good things will happen.
that's right. Be a good drummer, and great things will happen. Yeah. I don't believe that, many people know that. I really don't believe in coincidences. There's no such thing. You do something, it brings on something, and then you make decisions, which path to go. And that will bring on something. And in this whole podcast, and many of the people I've had on have their own, coincidence. There's no such thing as a coincidence. You do this thing or you do not. Like if you hadn't gone into the setting up the whole electronic thing or being interested in that and developing it, because frankly, it just changes so much and so often. You have to keep up. If you look away for 6 months, you're in
Forget
another
it.
world, right? So by keeping up and being there, being there as a drummer, as a musician, as a curious person in that field, then that allowed you to go on to that next step, which involves meeting your wife, involves having a family, involves now you don't want to be on the road, so you're going to concentrate on doing this in a more non-road environment. Funny thing.
Well, the other thing that coincided with this and made it so perfect is I was in Widowmaker touring, not big places, playing big clubs, small theaters. Um, in 93, we put a second record out, and that was the time the whole grunge thing was coming together and taking over. And the hair bands, we were pigeonholed into being another hair band. Although we were really a kick-ass rock band, but yet at that time we had the big hair. There's no denying. We got clumped into that, and they were just history by mid '90s. And this is when the whole Beatstreet happened, and when I started having kids. My first child was born in '95, my second in '98. So it was so perfect that I was able to be a dad, a parent, when my kids were born, and seeing them through grade school and seeing them every day and having dinner every night with my family. And by that time, you did that road thing for how many years? It was such a beautiful transition for me. I mean, at first it was really hard to let go of being a full-time drummer. But when you're walking into a recording studio every day, you still feel like you're involved. And between the Lions, I did the show for 10 years. We were playing, making music. Like the first year, I think we recorded 40 songs and did an underscore for 30 shows.
Wow.
That was intense. We're playing all the time.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, today the budgets aren't there for that. And with the advancements in technology, you can put together a damn good track without having live players on it. Or you put together 80% of it and have a guitar player or maybe a percussionist, or and just to make it feel real or organic. But yeah, I mean, the days of hiring a band to do every bit of underscore for a television show are pretty much history, unfortunately.
Yeah. And are you getting the sense that the technology is just going to keep on going, and AI I'm pushing the buttons here. AI, the way it's going, all these latest technologies, you could technically say, well, I want this kind of song, this kind of groove, this kind of thing, and this key.
Totally. I totally feel there'll be two schools, it's kind of like just talk about drumming, just like the electronic drums and acoustic drums. I went to the DW50 party out in LA about, what was it, 2 months ago, and what they're developing in electronic drums is what brought on the Roland takeover and Roland DW marriage.
Yeah.
Because DW was developing stuff way beyond what Roland was doing. And Roland had things that,
Sure.
the two of them together is going to be scary for, I would predict 2 years from now, it's going to be pretty scary what can be played on electronic drums.
Sure. No, I was
What DW is coming out with next year is a real drum kit that you take off the regular heads, you put on the electronic heads, and it becomes a total electronic drum kit, no wires. Everything's done through Bluetooth.
Yeah, yeah.
And you can get a head and go, it goes up in pitch as you bend down on the head. It really behaves like an acoustic drum. It's scary.
Yeah.
And now that DW and Roland together, it's going to be wild. As yourself, a percussionist, and it's going to be really interesting. And yeah, I'm old school. I still play 2 bass drums. I don't get into double pedals even. I'm really old school. But yet there's no denying that this is getting more and more believable. Sure. As I told you, because I'm down in Florida now. I just bought my first V drum kit 2 weeks ago. It was just delivered, and I'm playing around with it now, and it's a lot of fun. I could see cutting some tracks and doing stuff with it. It's the kick, snare, hat, and ride are pretty good sounding, So yeah. So is AI going to write songs? Well, what's that software now that everyone's using?
It's G. I was just reading about it. I know it's pretty scary.
But there's software now. You can basically tell it what you want, and it's built in loops and all kinds of things. Yeah. And it could pretty much create what you're looking to create. And yeah, I do think it's going to be a new school of musicians that is going to be learning a whole different way, and it's kind of cheating in a way, and it's kind of everything's going to sound the same in a way. And hey, you know what? You can't fight change. You can't, I don't want to sound like an old man and say, hey, when I was a kid, we used to.
in my day.
It is what it is. I mean, I listen to this. I try to explain to my daughter, especially my younger daughter, who's not young. She's 24 now, I say, like, but you realize we're driving around, I let her pick the stations, like, there weren't like two humans together making this record. I mean, these parts were phoned in. There's no band. That's a machine doing this, a machine doing that. I try to explain. She doesn't care. She likes the beat. She likes the lyrics. She likes the artist. I mean, it doesn't matter. It's.
Right.
But who am I to say that's not valid?
Right.
It's. I mean, I still listen to my '60s records. I have Traffic and Procol Harum. Moby Grape. I mean, I listen to stuff that I listened to as a teenager because I love the imperfections and the funny mixes. And back then, a mix was a performance. It wasn't just like nowadays. You could tweak it to death. And I love. There's a lot of charm in that. I love when I hear mistakes on records, and it's just you feel like you're watching some guys playing in a little club or in the garage or whatever,
Yeah,
I think there's a lot of charm.
I'm sure you remember the day, and I remember sometimes, being live in the studio, everybody live, no overdubs.
Yeah.
And then the engineer says to you, Aldo, I'd like you to, for this, the only way this is all going to work is if you play your cymbals super soft. Everything else could be loud. Like you have to mix yourself this way. So you had to play like that. When you listen back, it was amazing. I mean, I said, how did the guy think of that? And then I took that with me because you don't have to play cymbals that loud, really. And then he said, he gave me this, it was challenging. He gave me the challenge. So I'm playing my right hand on the cymbal, super, super light. And I'm going,
wow,
that was tough. But
and how about you come out of a fill and how do you crash? How do you come out of a fill and crash on the downbeat by just going
gently? But you imagine what it would sound like on the other side, because that was the performance, right?
Yeah.
Or playing live. I used to do a national TV show here, and we were 19 musicians live on the air, right? I mean, now I think back, and as you say, now somebody's listening to that or watching that. Doesn't matter. They don't really care because they didn't have that experience, because we're talking as the person who did it. Yeah. But he or she who's listening on the other side, it doesn't matter. They like it or not. Right? It's amazing. And I remember talking about this thing, these Wi-Fi drums, amazing, Bluetooth drums. Yeah. Because I had Don and John on podcast. We talked about this.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah. And I said, I knew they're working on something, but I didn't know the insides. And they talked to me about this, and they didn't say it all, but I'm putting two and two together. I said, oh my God, I'm imagining where that's going to go. But you're still playing.
Yeah. Well, check it out. The three main engineers in Japan from Roland are now living in California. Yeah, that's happening as we speak. I found that out because of just recently getting this Roland kit, talking to the Roland people, and yeah, it's, I think it was all a big secret until the DW50 party, because then they actually put it out and said, check it out. Here it is, and I was blown away. I was blown away. So it is what it is, Yeah. I mean, maybe getting on in the years, it might make life a little easier.
Well, you remember, I mean, when you brought out you had that book, and I own everybody's book, and I have yours too, the double drums.
I have everyone's.
Double drums book, right?
Yeah.
The double bass drums. And I mean, I had the Colin Bailey bass drum book, which I went through many times. And that was just for one drum. And then I said, of course, this is a great idea. So I worked with your book too. And then so there's the whole mechanical stuff that we all deal with. I mean, I just brought out this Cuban rhythms for percussion and drum set, but that's not necessarily just the techniques. It's all about the music and the understanding the process and how things work together. That's a whole other world. But and you have to have that knowledge to compose, to produce, to play. And a book like yours or any materials and knowledge that we gather along still is important. You can't just program if you don't know what you're doing or you don't know what you want, right? But if you know what you're looking for, you still need that information. You still need that knowledge. You still need that having taste, having creativity, being curious. Still, that's where I'm the optimist in all of this. It's going to change, right? But all of those things are still there on their level.
No doubt.
Yeah. And it's funny. I mean, I think, that new generation of person isn't going to be the guy like the Twisted Sister or the good rat thing, but they'll listen to it and they'll say, okay, I can take that idea, it gives me another idea, and do it totally differently with their fingers. But it's all up here, right?
Yeah, but that's not fair. You need to sweat and work to make that happen.
Yeah, and we lived through that, and we sweat a lot. And
oh my God. Think about playing some of those bars where you were drenched by the middle of the first song and there was more cigarette smoke in there. I mean, I was never a smoker in my life, but I can imagine all the smoke I inhaled from playing bars for so many years.
Oh yeah. And I almost forgot about that. You're absolutely right.
Right.
I remember playing this club 3 nights a week when I was at university. And every once in a while, I would take the drums home and leave them on the balcony.
Oh, they stunk.
Well, just to air them out because I was never a smoker also, and you just realize afterwards, stunk is a nice word.
I did it once a year. I remember when I was a kid, my mom would be like, "Leave those in the garage," But I would take them home once a year to clean them, take all the lugs apart, and wow, did they stink. And the road cases, as soon as you open them, reeked.
It's amazing that was that. So now they don't have to do that anymore, which is the nice part.
They smell totally different. They still smell like wood.
That's right. Yeah. No, I never thought about that. I mean, you just brought that image down where I would have to go like this and bring them out to the porch on my, wherever I was, and they would stay outside overnight, a few days, whatever it took.
No, but remember when you first got a drum and you took the head off to change heads, you would smell the wood inside the drum, and it was just a earthy smell. But back then, it was you smelled cigarettes.
That's right. That's right.
Oh, plus back then, well, there was an era where, early 70s, where people were taking the front heads off of their toms, the bottom heads off their tom. Everyone wanted that concert tom sound or whatever, or projection, and so the drum just totally reeked. It was just, there was no head to keep the inside fresh. Anyway, that was a different era.
So now you still have this the studio going, and you're producing and you're writing and that's amazing.
Well, we do a lot of children's television, which is such a feel-good thing. At the end of the day, it's not like advertising where you're selling a bar of soap or some shampoo. You're teaching kids. I mean, the first show I did, Between the Lions, the whole thing was teaching kids how to read through phonics, through the sound of the vowels, and we would have like a group called the Vowels, and it was basically like an R&B, and the girls would sing like R&B kind of tunes to show how vowels sounded. So at the end of the day, you're teaching kids, and we still do that today. We do a show that's really popular called Blue's Clues. It's been going forever. My kids grew up with it. We do a lot of stuff for Sesame Street now. so because they have all these offshoot shows. So that, I mean, we do all things audio. We do films, we do everything from podcasts to audio books to, anything you hear needs audio, needs, good engineering, good mixing, good sound design. So we're involved in everything. But our main thing, ever since the first day when I played drums for Between the Lions, has been children's television, you know. So like my
Nice.
clients now are, Sesame Workshop, Netflix, a bunch of different companies like Nine Story, which specialize in children's education. So again, it's a feel good thing, My kids are grown, but I'm still teaching kids, and I like that, you
Nice,
know.
nice. That Sesame Street. Remember Sesame Street? Remember the Buddy Rich appearance with the duel?
Oh yeah,
That
there's
one-
yeah.
amazing. I mean, he had a sense of humor, but it was great that the guys did that to mix like the animation and make you think he's talking to a real person when he's talking
Yeah.
to. That
Oh,
was
absolutely.
that was fantastic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The puppeteers are amazing. It's a lost art form. Animation's a lot cheaper. When you do puppeteering, you need a ton of people on the set and really sophisticated lighting and a ton of monitors around. And they all wear like a little mic across like a headband mic, and they're underneath looking at a monitor at what it looks like on the television screen, and they're doing their thing like that, and even some of them, when they come into the studio to do voiceovers, they bring their puppet with them because they want to you know bring it to life with their voice.
Right.
It's yeah, some of those people have become really good friends, some of those
Nice.
Sesame
Nice.
puppeteers, and good crowd. It totally fun stuff.
Yeah, that's being there, showing up, being there at the right time, and of course, that's all like in your path. That's what you did, and you're in the right place at the right time. Coincidentally, it's not really a coincidence, but it's nice that it happens, and you keep yourself sane and keep moving also because it's important, right, for you to keep moving, keep evolving, and
Well, you
and
have to
still.
evolve in all directions of life, your personal, your private life, your musicianship life. I mean, I practice more now than I did when I was playing all the time because
Nice.
I just became, well, during the pandemic, I became a total pad nerd because I'm running the business from home, basically. Nobody's leaving the house. And so what do I need? I have my laptop here, I have my pad here. I started going through these drum books and gatherments and really fun stuff, and felt like a kid again, diving into drum books because I had a period where I was just doing that. I was doing it every night. I wasn't looking at drum books, and then I had a period where I had to get Beatstreet off the ground, where I wasn't playing as much as a drum nerd. I was just playing when I had to play a track. But now I've gotten more into like a hobby. Drumming is a beautiful hobby where you can play a couple hours a day and feel progress. And I'm hell bent on getting my grip more matched than it's ever been. I took some lessons from a great teacher down in Texas, Bill Bachman. We
Oh
did
yeah.
Zoom lessons. Bill is tremendous hand teacher,
Yeah.
and he turned my left hand, which was very German, a little more American, and it led to a lot of really good things like back finger technique. And anyway, long story short, I've become a student, very much a student again.
Nice. Good. Yeah,
And I
yeah.
and I love it. I love it because you're never done.
Oh,
There's always it's like everything else. The more you learn, the more you realize what you need to learn, and yeah, I never got into a lot of things like hybrid rudiments and stuff like that. Who cares? I didn't care about it, but now I really do. And and getting back to my days in Brooklyn, I kind of said, "Wow, I wonder what would have happened if I did do drum corps." Because there's so many drummers who did. From the Steve Gadd, and you see some of the great players today that are great educators, Tommy Igoe, and of course Bill Buckman, and that went through the ranks of drum corps, and
Right.
really great foundation for your hands, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, there are many different ways to do it. And the nice thing is realizing that you've never arrived. And I say to people, the day you think you've arrived, you're in deep trouble. Like, look up, because that's impossible. You never arrive.
No,
And
no.
just knowing, and the more, I mean, it just rejuvenates you. It keeps your curiosity sharp, because now, as long as you have your mind and your body, of course, but especially your mind, there's no reason, because now you know so much. Now you get it, right? Now you really get it. And now you can relive and go forward with all that history, but in a way, in a different state, because now you say, okay, I don't know all of this, but I'll take all the time I have. And that's like you extend your day,
Yeah.
daylight, by that, in many ways, even just figuratively. Anyway, it's amazing. We can go on for days, John. We could, but I want to thank you for being a guest and joining me on this. And finally, I see you in person.
Been a
Well,
long
almost in
time.
person. you know.
No, but I kind of like what these Zoom calls have done to life in general. I mean, during the pandemic, we started zooming in. We have a little New York drum club, and there's a couple of dozen people, but like, every week we once a month we'd get together for lunch. But now we're getting together every week, and yeah, every week maybe half a dozen people to a dozen people would show up on the screen, and it was like a way to keep in
Yeah.
touch with everyone. That and social media, it's kind of cool. It's kind of cool way of knowing what everyone's doing. I always know who's playing where just from looking at social media, and
Yeah.
I don't miss out on something that's going to be in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
like Corky Lang just had a 75th birthday party right down the block from here. Well, yeah, a little bit of a drive. The other night, if it wasn't for social media, I wouldn't have known about that. And we went and hung, and it was a great time. And you know, and there's a lot of drummers who live down here. I'm in Florida now, so I am
Yeah.
getting back into post-COVID. We actually get to see people.
Yeah.
So nothing replaces that, but at the same time, I really embrace all the technology out there, and it's kind of overwhelming in a way. I mean, how between YouTube and Drum Channel and Drumeo, and there's a lot of stuff out
Oh
there.
yes. Oh yes. Yeah. Yeah. And that's good that you choose, but you can be anywhere.
Right.
It
Yeah.
can be
Yeah.
anywhere. So it's beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. You can pick and choose and go whatever path you want. And of course, most likely go down some rabbit hole that's never ending.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Anyway, I want to
Yeah.
thank you again for taking the time to do this. And as I always say, to be continued.